The mountain had watched the village for generations, silent and patient, while people learned to fear the night without ever saying why. When a quiet man arrived, carrying hope he could not afford to lose, he believed the mountain was only stone and shadow. Then he fell in love with a girl the mountain had already chosen. When the wind began calling her name after dark, the village understood what was happening again. He did not. This is a story about love, possession, and the price of standing between them. If you enjoy slow, chilling stories like this, subscribe now so you do not miss the next one. His name was Adrian Hale. He never liked attention. He carried himself with a quiet presence, as if he had learned to live inside his own thoughts long before he ever came near that mountain. People often described him as calm, gentle, reserved, but silence like his does not come naturally. It comes from life pressing too hard on someone for too long. Adrian had always been the kind of man who stayed at the edge of gatherings. He did not seek crowds. He did not enjoy loud spaces. He preferred soft voices, steady conversations, and places where he could think clearly. There was a depth in his eyes that made it seem like he was always remembering something heavy, something that still followed him quietly. He came to the village at a time when he was already trying to rebuild himself. He carried his belongings in modest bags, and he carried his past inside his chest. The village seemed peaceful at first sight. Small wooden houses, narrow paths worn smooth by years of use, trees standing silently between homes like watchful guardians, fields stretching gently to the foot of the mountain. It felt calm. It looked like a place that still respected nature and silence. At first glance, you might think Adrian belonged there, but the people of the village had a cautious way of living, a carefulness he did not understand immediately. They moved through their days with quiet discipline. They avoided certain questions. They respected certain boundaries. And above everything else, they treated the mountain like something more than a piece of land, like something that watched them back. Adrian noticed this early. Whenever he mentioned the mountain, conversations changed. Faces grew tense, eyes shifted away, voices dropped lower. People answered with short responses or awkward smiles that did not reach their eyes. Some pretended not to hear. Others simply walked away as if they wanted the subject to die before it fully formed. It was not the reaction of people who disliked a place. It was the reaction of people who felt bound to it, people who understood something deeply and refused to speak of it. Old men sitting outside their homes would shake their heads slowly whenever Adrian's curiosity lingered too long in that direction. Women would tighten their grip on whatever they were holding when the mountain came into discussion. Children, normally careless with their words, stayed unusually quiet whenever they looked toward it. No one said much, yet everything spoke. The warnings were there. Not through shouting or strict commands, through subtle pauses, through uneasy smiles, through silence that carried fear inside it, through the way everyone behaved as if the mountain had rules, and breaking those rules meant inviting something unwelcome. Adrian saw all that. He noticed. He understood that something was different about this place, but he stayed. He stayed because something in him longed for a new beginning. He had already lived through too much loss, too much pain, too many nights where he lay awake feeling an empty space where someone once existed in his life, someone he cared about deeply, someone he could not save. Love had once held his world together. Losing it shattered everything. For a long time, he lived inside grief that did not speak, but remained. That grief shaped him, quietened him, and taught him how lonely life could become when the heart loses its anchor. So when he found warmth again, when he began to feel something alive inside him after such a long, cold period of emotional numbness, he clung to it. He refused to let fear define his decisions again. He refused to walk away this time. He refused to lose someone he cared about because of uncertainty. That was why warnings did not move him. Hope returned to his life, and he held it carefully like something fragile he could not afford to lose again. The quiet happiness he felt was worth every strange look, every cautious whisper, every silent boundary the villagers lived with. He believed that love could outlive fear. He believed that he could stay strong this time. He believed nothing could break what he was beginning to rebuild inside himself. He thought the mountain was only a place. He did not know yet that it was watching him already. Her name was Elara Wynne. She did not stand out because she tried to. She stood out because there was something about her presence that made the world feel quieter, softer, and strangely meaningful when she was near. Elara had a calm beauty that did not shout for attention. It lived in her gentle eyes, in the steady way she moved, and in the warmth that settled around her whenever she smiled. She belonged to the village, yet she always seemed slightly distant from it, as if part of her existed somewhere else. Her hair carried the wind easily. Her voice sounded like it had learned how to speak without disturbing the silence. She never looked rushed. She never looked lost. She carried herself with a kind of quiet acceptance, like someone who already knew life held things beyond ordinary understanding and had learned to live with it. Elara was kind in a way that felt sincere. She helped the elderly without needing recognition. She comforted children without making noise about it. She spoke gently to people who carried heavy worries. She made others feel seen without asking for anything in return. There was warmth around her, something human and real, something that drew Adrian closer before he even realized what was happening. Yet, despite how gentle and caring she was, people in the village kept their distance. They did not treat her with cruelty. They did not insult her or act openly hostile. They simply stepped aside quietly. They avoided walking too close. Conversations became shorter when she arrived. Smiles toward her carried respect, but not closeness. It was as if she lived among them, but not with them. Adrian noticed very early. He would watch how villagers lowered their eyes when she passed, how they greeted her politely, then left quickly, how mothers would pull their children slightly closer, how laughter always seemed to fade when she entered a space. Elara did not react to any of this. She did not complain. She did not ask why. She simply continued living, accepting it as part of life, like someone who had long stopped expecting the world to treat her differently. What tied their reactions together was not hatred. It was fear, a quiet fear, a fear they refused to name. Elara had a strange emotional connection to the mountain. You could see it in the way her eyes softened whenever she looked toward it. There was no joy in that expression. There was no hatred either. It was something in between, something layered, something deeply personal. She spoke very little about it, but whenever the mountain came into conversation, she grew quieter, more thoughtful, like she was listening to something only she could hear. Sometimes Adrian would see her standing quietly at a distance, staring toward the towering shape in the distance, as if searching for answers that would never fully come. Other times, she seemed almost burdened by it, like the mountain held a part of her life she could not escape from. Despite all this, love grew between them. It did not rush. It did not explode into their lives. It developed gently, step by step, through small conversations, through shared silences, through the presence they found comfort in. Adrian felt something inside him slowly heal whenever she was near. She brought warmth back into his world. A steady light, an emotional anchor he thought he would never have again. Elara, who had carried loneliness for so long, found reassurance in him. She allowed herself to laugh softly again. She allowed herself to hope. She allowed herself to feel seen as a person, not as something to fear or quietly avoid. They did not need grand gestures to fall in love. They needed understanding. They needed patience, and they found it in each other. The village elders noticed. Their eyes followed whenever the two walked together. Their expressions tightened. Their whispers became quieter but heavier. Elders did not like what they saw, yet they did not confront directly at first. Instead, they watched like people who already knew something dangerous lived beneath the surface and feared what might happen if love continued to grow. When they eventually spoke, their words carried firmness without clarity. They warned Adrian in controlled tones. They encouraged distance. They advised caution. They spoke in circles instead of giving answers. They never explained why. They did not tell him what they truly feared. They did not reveal what bound Elara to the mountain. They did not say why their hearts carried dread whenever she loved or was loved in return. They simply wanted the relationship to end without allowing truth to come out fully. But Adrian had already chosen, and Elara, for the first time in her life, chose to stand beside someone rather than suffer alone. Together, they remained in love, unaware that their closeness had already awakened something old, patient, and possessive, watching from the mountain in silent attention. It did not take long before Adrian began to notice that life with Elara followed rules no one openly acknowledged, but everyone silently respected. The first thing he realized was time. She never stayed out late. As evening approached, when the sky began to soften and shadows stretched across the village paths, an uneasiness would quietly settle over her. Her smiles would become smaller, her voice would drop lower. She would look around more often, not nervously, but cautiously, as if she were listening for something approaching that only she could sense. By nightfall, Elara always found her way indoors. There were no exceptions. No casual strolls, no aimless wandering. No simple nighttime walks beneath the stars like many lovers would cherish. When Adrian once casually suggested staying out a little longer, she reacted instantly. Not with anger, not with irritation, but with a quiet, firm fear. "Not when it gets dark," she said softly, eyes not meeting his. "I cannot stay out then." She did not explain further. She did not need to. The seriousness in her voice said enough. And it was not only her behavior that changed at night. The village itself responded to darkness differently. By the time the sun disappeared behind the mountain, doors were shut, windows closed, curtains drawn, laughter faded early, streets emptied long before true night arrived. The world around the mountain slept in fear, not rest. Then there was the strange connection she had with the mountain itself. Elara never went there. She never walked near its base. She never climbed even the lowest slope, yet she spoke about it often. Sometimes she would talk about the mountain as if it were part of her life, not just part of the land. She would describe small things about it, details only someone deeply familiar would know. The way wind sounded differently around it, the way mornings near it felt strange and heavy, the way silence near its height seemed thicker than normal silence. She talked about it like someone might talk about someone they once cared for and feared at the same time. Carefully, thoughtfully, with caution in her voice. Adrian began to notice a pattern in her words. There were always hints of promises and restrictions woven into her sentences, not always directly. Sometimes they slipped out unintentionally. "There are things you must never disturb," she once said under her breath. Another time, while looking toward the mountain, she murmured, "Some things remember when you break your word." He noticed fear there, real fear, but also resignation. Like someone who had lived with an unspoken agreement her entire life and had accepted that there was no escape from it. Whenever Adrian tried to ask deeper questions, her expression changed. Her warmth would dim a little. Her eyes would take on a distant, quiet sadness, like she wanted to tell him, but something heavy pressed against her chest, stopping the truth. She would shake her head gently and say, "Please, Adrian, some things are better not spoken about." That was the first time he truly felt that she was hiding something from him, not out of deceit, out of protection. But slowly, small cracks began to appear in the calm surface of their world. The first unsettling sign came without warning. They were speaking one evening in the fading light. Elara's expression seemed normal. She laughed softly at something he said. Her shoulders relaxed. For a brief moment, everything felt ordinary and safe. Then suddenly she froze. Her eyes stopped focusing on him. Her smile faded instantly. It was as if something behind him had silently called her attention. But there was nothing there. The air around them was still. The world had not changed. Yet Elara's breathing slowed. Her pupils slightly widened, and her body became tense like someone listening to a distant voice only she could hear. "Elara?" he called gently. She did not answer immediately. Her lips parted slightly, as though a thought or a whisper had forced itself into her mind. A faint tremor passed through her fingers. And then, just as quickly as it happened, she blinked and looked normal again. "I am fine," she said softly, forcing a faint smile that did not feel convincing. Her eyes, however, carried something different after that. Something worried, something guilty, something afraid of what might happen next. That was when Adrian realized Elara was living between two expectations. One belonging to him, and one belonging to something older, unseen, and deeply tied to the mountain. And although she tried to live as if life were normal, there were rules quietly shaping her every step, rules that she did not fully control, rules that were not human in origin. Adrian sat there for a long moment after her confession, feeling the weight of everything she had just revealed settle slowly into his chest. The world around them remained quiet. The wind barely moved. The distant mountain stood silent and unmoving, yet somehow more present than ever before. He looked at Elara, really looked at her, as if seeing her life not as something mysterious anymore, but as something painfully human. A life of quiet fear, a life of unspoken limits, a life shaped by something she never asked for but was forced to carry. She had grown used to it. That was perhaps the saddest part, the acceptance in her voice. The calm way she explained a life that never truly belonged to her. It was the tone of someone who had lived too long under something bigger than she could fight, someone who had learned to exist rather than live freely. Slowly, Adrian reached out and took her hand. Her fingers were cold. "Elara," he said softly, his voice steady but full of feeling, "you are not something to be claimed. You are not something to be owned. You are a person. You deserve peace. You deserve a life that belongs to you." She looked at him, her eyes conflicted, unsure whether to believe in hope or hold on to the safety of accepting her fate. "You do not understand," she whispered. "People have tried before. People have challenged what binds me, and the mountain always reminds them that it cannot be defied without cost. This is older than me, older than any of us. I have lived my life trying not to cause more pain." Adrian tightened his hold on her hand gently, but firmly. "Then let it come to me," he said quietly. "Let whatever danger exists look at me instead. If there is a price, it will not be your life again. You have already given enough to fear. I will not stand aside and watch you be controlled. I will not walk away and leave you to face something like this alone. I will not lose you." There was no uncertainty in his tone, no hesitation. He sounded like a man who had already made peace with whatever consequences came with that promise. For a moment, Elara simply stared at him, not breathing, as if she needed time to truly absorb that someone was choosing to stand with her fully, willingly, without retreat. Her eyes softened slowly, and the tension in her shoulders seemed to loosen. "You do not know what you are promising," she said, but her voice carried a tremor of emotion rather than warning. "You do not know what this may cost you." He exhaled softly, eyes never leaving hers. "I know what it costs to lose someone you love and spend the rest of your life wishing you had fought harder," he replied in a low, heartfelt tone. "I know what regret feels like. I know what it means to live with emptiness. I would rather face something terrifying and try than live while watching you disappear into something you never chose." That was the truth of him. All of it. The pain he carried, the grief he once endured, the fear of losing something precious again. All of those lived inside this single promise. Elara's eyes filled not with dramatic tears, but with quiet emotion, the kind that slowly warms the heart and breaks it at the same time. She leaned closer, resting her forehead gently against his chest. Adrian wrapped his arms around her carefully, like holding something fragile that he valued more than anything else in the world. There was no rush in their embrace, no desperation, only deep warmth and a slow, steady closeness that said more than words could. For the first time in a long while, Elara allowed herself to feel safe. She allowed herself to lean on someone instead of being the one who silently carried everything. She allowed herself to believe, even if just for a moment, that she was not alone in whatever future waited. Around them, the village remained quiet. The evening sky softened further, the light fading into a peaceful shade, painting the world in gentle colors. Everything felt calm, settled, balanced. For that brief period, there was peace, a fragile peace, but real. A moment where the world felt full and love wrapped around both of them like something steady and grounding. It was the calm before the storm. But they did not know that yet. All they knew in that moment was that they loved each other, truly and deeply. And now their love was not simply something beautiful. It carried weight, it carried risk, it carried a promise made against something ancient and unseen. The story no longer belonged to a mysterious mountain or a fearful village. It belonged to Adrian and Elara. It belonged to hearts refusing to surrender quietly. And whatever would come next would no longer feel distant. The stakes were no longer a story of fate. They were personal now. Night arrived quietly at first, the way it always did in that village. The sky slowly deepened, the last traces of daylight fading into a heavy darkness that seemed thicker than normal darkness, as if the world around the mountain held shadows differently from anywhere else. Houses closed early, doors locked, windows sealed, and lamps dimmed, as though everyone understood that night did not simply mark time here. It marked the beginning of something watched and feared. Inside Elara's home, everything felt calm for a brief while. A small oil lamp burned gently, casting soft light across the room. Adrian stayed close to her, refusing to leave, refusing to break the promise he made. They spoke little, but they did not need many words. Their closeness said enough. Every now and then he would glance toward the window, not because he expected anything, but because unease had quietly settled into his thoughts. Then the wind changed. It did not rush, it did not roar. It simply shifted in a way that felt deliberate, like something in the air had awakened. The walls absorbed a faint vibration, and the stillness outside turned sharper, alert, listening. Adrian felt it before he fully heard anything. A subtle heaviness in his chest, a strange pressure around the room, as though the night itself had drawn nearer. That was when it happened, her name, not spoken by a human voice, not shouted, not gently called, just spoken in a way that felt inside the air, as if the night formed a mouth of its own and breathed her identity into existence. Elara, it was soft, strangely tender, yet deeply unsettling. The sound did not come from a direction. It came from everywhere around them, from the walls, from the dark outside, from the silence itself. Adrian's heart tightened immediately, his eyes moving to her instinctively. Elara froze. Her breath stopped halfway, her shoulders stiffening as though something had quietly reached inside her and held her still. Her eyes no longer focused on the room. They slowly lifted toward the door without awareness, as if responding to a command more powerful than choice. Then it came again. Elara. This time, the air outside carried whispers. They did not form clear sentences, just fragments of breath-like sounds that mingled with the wind, building softly, layered voices overlapping, like memories being spoken all at once. They almost sounded pleading, they almost sounded loving, but beneath that softness lived something far more frightening, something deeply possessive. Adrian's pulse quickened. Slowly, faint footsteps began circling the house. They did not sound rushed. They were measured, calm, intentional, like someone walking around, inspecting, waiting. The wooden boards outside responded with faint pressure, and every step echoed with quiet authority, as if the ground itself understood who was walking on it. Then, a gentle knock echoed at the door, not loud, not forceful, a slow, deliberate tap like someone who did not need to demand entry because it already knew it belonged there. Adrian's hand tightened around Elara's, but she no longer reacted like someone afraid of danger. She reacted like someone being called home. Her body relaxed unnaturally, not in relief, but in surrender. Her breathing slowed strangely, her eyelids drooped slightly, and an empty calmness washed over her face. The warmth that always lived in her expression slipped away, replaced by a distant, dreamlike gaze. "Elara, stay with me," Adrian whispered urgently, pulling her closer. She did not respond. Another knock. Then another. They were patient. They were confident. They sounded less like requests and more like reminders. Something shifted again outside. A faint movement brushed softly along the side of the house, like fingers tracing the walls, like something unseen feeling its way toward her. Shadows at the edge of the lamplight flickered slightly, even though there was no wind strong enough to move them. The house creaked in a slow, uneasy protest, as though it understood too well what was happening and had no strength to resist. Elara's lips parted slightly. Her eyes no longer belonged to the room. They were fixed on nothing and everything at once. She was slipping somewhere else, pulled towards something beyond the walls, beyond safety, beyond human reach. Her body leaned forward unintentionally. Adrian acted on instinct, wrapping his arms around her, grounding her, forcing physical presence where her mind was being taken away. "No," he whispered fiercely, his voice trembling not with weakness, but with fear of losing her. "You are here. Stay here. Stay with me." For the first time there was resistance. Her body tensed not against him, but against whatever invisible thread had wrapped itself around her mind. A faint tremor passed through her, like a struggle happening elsewhere that reflected through your body. Her breathing grew irregular, caught between following the call and fighting to remain present. Outside, the whispers grew louder. They layered into something both human and inhuman at the same time, both affectionate and demanding, both sorrowful and commanding. They spoke her name again, deeper this time, thicker, carrying something like longing. Footsteps circled closer. Something brushed the window gently. The lamp flickered. Another knock came, slower this time, as if the presence outside had all the patience in the world and knew that resistance only delayed the inevitable. Elara's eyes finally shifted, but they did not look at Adrian. They tilted slightly upward, unfocused, glowing faintly with tears she did not cry. She whispered something barely audible, something like apology, something like surrender. Adrian shook his head desperately, his voice still soft but firm as he held her. "I promised," he breathed, tightening his grip, pulling her back against him, anchoring her heart to his presence. "You are not going anywhere. You belong here. You belong with me. Whatever waits outside does not own you." The house seemed to respond to his defiance. The air thickened, the ground vibrated faintly, the night pressed harder against the walls, as though listening, as though deciding how to react. Inside that small room, the world narrowed to only two people and something unseen demanding one of them. Fear did not rush. It lingered. It wrapped around them like slow, tightening hands. And in that moment, anyone listening would feel trapped inside that house with them. Surrounded by whispers, watched by darkness, threatened by footsteps that did not belong to any living person, while the girl they loved began slipping away into something far beyond human understanding. And the only thing holding her back was a man's arms and a promise made against a mountain that had never lost anything it claimed before. The night pressed harder against the house, whispers tightening around it like unseen hands, when suddenly another sound broke through the darkness, not supernatural this time, but human. Urgent footsteps gathered outside, not stealthy and controlled like the ones earlier, but rushed, heavy, panicked, driven by fear. Voices followed, hushed at first, then rising with agitation as they drew closer. Someone banged loudly on the door, then another, and another. This knocking was not calm, not patient, and not inviting. It was desperate, almost angry, like a final warning issued before something irreversible would happen. Adrian held Elara tighter instinctively, every muscle in his body tense, his mind balancing between fear of what was outside and fear of what was already calling her from the night itself. "Elara, open the door," a man's voice shouted, sharp and demanding. "Elara, come out," another voice followed, trembling not with courage but with dread. The room felt smaller as the villagers gathered. Shadows of multiple figures blocked the faint light filtering through the thin curtain. Their shapes clung together, forming a wall of human fear. More voices joined, some firm, some breaking, all circling around one shared emotion: terror of the mountain and what it wanted. Adrian finally moved to the door, but did not let go of Elara entirely, guiding her with him so that his presence stayed connected to hers, as if physical closeness alone might anchor her spirit. He opened the door cautiously, revealing the village elders at the front, their faces lined not with years alone, but with years of knowing something no one should ever have had to live with. Behind them stood men with torches, women clutching their shawls tightly, and younger villagers who tried to look brave but failed, their fear obvious in their trembling breaths. Everyone's eyes were wide. Their attention was fixed directly on Elara, not with curiosity, not with judgment, but with a painful mixture of sorrow and resignation. One of the elders stepped forward, an older man whose voice usually carried calm authority, but tonight carried exhaustion and fear instead. "She must come with us," he said quietly, though there was no softness in his words. "It is calling, and if she does not go willingly, it will not stop until it takes more than just her." Adrian's expression hardened, his jaw tightening as he instinctively stepped in front of Elara, placing himself physically between her and the crowd. "No," he replied, his voice calm but firm, holding back the storm of anger building in him. "You cannot take her. She is not something to give away." The elder's eyes softened briefly, almost sadly. "You think this is about choice," he said, his voice gaining weight. "You believe this is ordinary danger, but you are not from here. You do not understand the story you have walked into." Elara stood still behind Adrian, not fighting, not crying, only listening with a quiet heaviness in her presence, as though she already knew what they were about to say. The elder continued. "A long time ago, before we were born and before the village ever had walls, the mountain was not silent. It had a spirit, ancient and aware, something that existed long before humans ever placed their feet upon its land. It was not cruel at first. It was simply lonely in a way nothing human could understand. It watched life, watched people, watched connections grow, and for the first time in its existence, it saw something beautiful it wanted for itself." He paused for a moment, his breathing slow, his eyes drifting toward Elara with a mixture of reverence and fear. "It fell in love," he said quietly. The villagers murmured softly, some bowing their heads as if even hearing this truth again wounded them. "There was a girl long ago who carried a soul unlike others," he continued. "A warmth, a light, something pure that even the mountain felt drawn to. She lived, she loved, she breathed like any other. But the mountain watched her with a devotion that should never have belonged to something not human. When she fell in love with a man, when she chose a life that did not include it, the mountain reacted like something heartbroken and dangerous." His voice deepened with sorrow. "It took her. Not violently, not instantly. It did not drag her screaming. It pulled her gently, calling her with whispers, surrounding her with comfort, convincing her that its love was eternal and harmless. She vanished into its depths, and the mountain kept her spirit, holding it close, refusing to let it go. But spirits do not stay contained forever, not when they belong to something meant to live. So it began a cycle. When that girl's soul returned to life again, the mountain recognized it," the elder continued with tired eyes. "It remembered her essence. It remembered what it loved. Every generation, when she is born again into a different body with the same soul, the mountain calls. It claims her. It holds her. It never forgets. And every time it repeats the same tragedy." Adrian felt Elara's hand tremble slightly. "That is why she was born here," the elder said, pointing gently toward Elara without hostility. "The mountain does not gamble. It ensures she never grows far away. It binds her birth to its land, so when she reaches the age where love begins, when her heart starts choosing again, it will be here, waiting." The truth settled like something heavy across the space, a love triangle that never belonged in nature, a man who loves her now, a spirit that loved her always, and a girl trapped between both. "If she refuses," the elder continued, his voice trembling now, "the mountain does not simply let her go. It turns restless. The ground begins to tremble. The air becomes thin. People disappear, sometimes slowly, sometimes violently. The land suffers until it gets what it wants. And if she accepts its call, she disappears forever, taken again into something eternal that gives no life back." A woman in the crowd silently wept, covering her mouth as if trying to contain grief that came from memory, perhaps remembering others who had been lost to the mountain before. Another elder spoke softly, almost pleading. "We do not want to hurt her. We do not want to offer her as anything cruel. But every generation there comes a time when the mountain calls louder, and when it does, the village must decide whether to protect one life or protect everyone else. This is the night it chose to claim her again. And if she does not go, it will punish all of us." The torches burned brighter against the darkness, their flames shaking slightly as if reacting to a presence watching overhead. Adrian's heart pounded, but now the fear was layered with something else. Fury at a fate that dared to decide her life for her. He looked back at Elara, seeing the quiet devastation in her eyes, the weight of endless lifetimes pressing down on her heart. She had always known, somewhere deep inside. She had always been preparing herself for this moment, living with it like an unspoken sentence hanging quietly above her existence. The mountain loved her soul. Adrian loved her heart. And she stood in the middle, human, fragile, living, with a destiny that demanded sacrifice either way. If she refused, everyone around her would suffer. If she accepted, she would vanish into something eternal yet isolating, losing herself forever. No one spoke for a long moment. The villagers waited like people standing at the edge of disaster. The night listened, patient and aware, and the mountain simply awaited her choice. The decision did not come through shouting or sudden bravery. It came quietly, the way real courage often does, from a place inside Adrian that had already lost once in life and refused to lose again. As the villagers stood frozen between fear and helplessness, as the whispers outside thickened into something colder and more possessive, Adrian turned toward Elara and knew there was only one path left to take. "I will not allow this to happen," he said softly, his voice steady in a way that surprised even him. "If this mountain wants to claim you, then it will have to face me first." The elders tried to stop him. Their voices trembled with urgency and warning, because they had seen men try before, and those men did not return in ways that resembled who they once were. But Adrian no longer heard their explanations. The world narrowed down to Elara, to her trembling breaths, to the fear in her eyes that was not only for herself but for him, because she knew what waited ahead. The wind shifted again, the call returned, "Elara." This time it was not outside, it was around them, inside the walls, in the spaces between their breaths. Her body responded before her mind could. Her steps drew forward helplessly, gently, like a sleepwalker being led by unseen hands. The villagers fell silent, opening a fearful path as if watching destiny walk through them. Adrian did not hesitate. He took her hand and held it firmly, guiding her instead of letting her walk alone, as though if she must face whatever waited on that mountain, she would not do so without him beside her. She did not fight him. She did not even look like she knew fully where she was moving anymore. Her expression carried a distant softness, a fragile calm that felt wrong, like a heart already half taken. They left the safety of light behind. The village grew smaller, the houses disappeared. The night thickened as they walked beyond familiar ground. The world seemed to lose warmth with every step they took closer to the mountain. The path ahead was not carved by human effort. It felt ancient, as though time itself had worn it into place for moments exactly like this. As they climbed, the wind grew different. It was no longer natural movement of air. It howled with emotions. It sounded angry at times. It sounded grieving at others. Sometimes it sounded like a chorus of distant cries that bled into screams that never fully formed. The higher they went, the worse it became. The ground trembled subtly beneath Adrian's steps, not enough to throw him off balance, but enough to remind him that the mountain was not merely land. Shadows stretched unnaturally across rocks and trees, moving like they had thoughts of their own. Some seemed to shape into forms of people for a split second before melting back into darkness, as if memories of those who came before lingered here, trapped in echoes and fading presence. Adrian could feel the mountain resist him. Small, loose stones slipped suddenly under his feet where the ground had seemed firm moments earlier, as if something tried to weaken his footing. Branches snapped near him where no visible force touched them. Cold drafts pushed against his chest like unseen hands trying to drive him backwards, urging him to give up, to leave her, to accept defeat as every other man before him had. But he continued. Every step carried fear, yes, but also something stronger, the unyielding will to hold on to someone he loved. Then the whispers that once called Elara alone began to change. They turned toward him. At first they sounded curious, as though examining him the way something ancient studies something new. Then they grew sharper, darker, many voices overlapping into something almost suffocating. They spoke in fragments that wrapped around his thoughts. "Leave her. She was never yours. You cannot fight what has always owned her." They did not shout. They pressed. They pressed into his skull, into his heart, trying to loosen the grip of his resolve, trying to thread doubt into his emotions. With every step, they became more personal. "You could not save the ones you lost before. You failed once. You will fail again. You will break, and she will still be ours." The mountain knew his grief. It used it. Adrian staggered for a brief moment under the emotional weight of those words, because they did not feel foreign. They felt like his own fears being dragged violently to the surface. Memories tried to claw into his mind. Old pain threatened to swallow him again. His chest tightened painfully. For a moment, he almost stopped. Then he felt Elara's hand twitch in his. He looked at her. Even lost in that trance-like state, she still existed. She still breathed. She still lived as someone worth fighting every darkness for. And in that moment, love grounded him in a way fear could not shake. "No," he whispered through clenched teeth, not shouting at the mountain, not challenging it with arrogance, but refusing it with the strength of someone whose heart knew where it belonged. "You will not decide her life. You will not write our ending." The mountain responded. The wind roared violently now, no longer lonely but furious. The screams carried through it became clearer, echoing like voices of countless souls begging or warning or regretting. Rocks loosened and rolled down dangerously, thundering past them, missing by inches but clearly meant to kill. The ground cracked in small fractures beneath his feet. Shadows lunged. Something brushed past him, ice cold, enough to steal breath from his lungs and make his body shiver uncontrollably as though a ghost had passed through his very being. Yet even when his body trembled, his grip on Elara never released. He could have turned back. Any reasonable human would have. But love does not calculate safety when the heart is on the line. If this mountain demanded a choice, then Adrian had already made his. "I will die here if I must," he breathed, voice breaking with determination rather than fear, staring into the darkness as though speaking directly to whatever ancient will listened. "But she will not belong to something that steals life in the name of love. If you want to destroy someone, destroy me. If you must take anything, take my breath, my life, my existence, but you do not touch her again." For the first time, the night fell still. The wind hesitated. The ground stopped trembling, as though the mountain itself paused, not because it felt threatened, but because it recognized something different. A love that was no longer fragile, no longer fearful, no longer easily bent. Adrian did not feel brave standing there. He felt raw, exposed, frightened. But behind all of that, there was something immovable. He loved Elara enough to meet an ancient spirit on its own ground and offer his life without hesitation. And in that moment, standing on a living mountain beneath a furious night sky, his courage crashed violently into the mountain's obsession, and emotional intensity peaked into something overwhelming, something powerful enough to shake destiny itself. The mountain did not answer him with more violence. It did not immediately strike, did not send boulders crashing or winds tearing the world apart. Instead, something changed in the air around them. The fury paused, not defeated, but suspended, as if the ancient presence that lived inside that massive body of stone and earth had stopped reacting and had begun listening instead. The wind softened. The screaming echoes faded gradually, not silenced, but drawn back like a curtain. The shadows stopped lunging and instead lingered, circling with a strange patience. For the first time since they climbed, the night no longer felt solely aggressive. It felt aware. Elara stood between life and surrender, her body still trapped in that unnatural trance, her soul pulled toward something unseen, when Adrian suddenly felt something else, something he had not expected. It was not hatred pressing against them. It was not spite. Beneath all the darkness and fear, there was something deeply human in nature, even if it did not belong to a human being. It felt like sorrow. It felt like loneliness so ancient and immense that it had shaped itself into something terrifying simply because it had never been answered, never comforted, never shared. The mountain breathed. Not literally, but the air shifted in long, steady waves, like something large and tired inhaling and exhaling after centuries of holding emotion it did not know how to release. The world around them seemed to soften while still remaining dangerous, the same way a wounded animal relaxes without ever losing its fangs. Then Adrian began to understand. This was not a monster born from hatred. This was something that had existed longer than any village, longer than memory, longer than records. It had watched life rise and fall around it. It had seen people build homes, love each other, laugh, grieve, grow old, and die. It had existed through loneliness that stretched across centuries, never sleeping, never forgetting. And then long ago, for the first time, it saw beauty in a form that was not the sky or the valleys below or the wind brushing across its slopes. It saw beauty in a soul. It fell in love in the only way something like it could. It did not understand fragility. It did not understand human freedom. It did not understand that loving something does not mean keeping it forever. It only understood possession, protection, and keeping safe what it valued. Adrian felt memories that did not belong to him brush against his mind like images carried by wind. He did not see clearly, but he felt it. The first time the mountain noticed her spirit in another lifetime, the warmth it felt in her presence, the fear that came with watching humans make choices, suffer, break, hurt each other, and eventually die. The mountain did not want her to be lost to time, to pain, to human endings. So it took her in the only way it knew, gently, possessively, completely. In its strange logic, it had not believed it was killing her. It believed it was saving her from a life that could hurt her. It believed eternal protection was love. Generations passed. The spirit returned in new lives. The mountain recognized her over and over again, and it repeated the same desperate mistake. It was never cruelty. It was fear of losing love once found. The wind carried that emotion now, regret mixed with stubborn attachment. The mountain did not wish to destroy Adrian. It simply could not bear to release something it had held for so long. Adrian's anger softened, replaced slowly by something heavier, more painful to feel: empathy. His heart broke not only for Elara, but for the ancient presence that loved her the wrong way because it never learned another way to love. He looked up toward the darkness that seemed to form a presence around them and spoke again, not with defiance this time, not with challenge, but with understanding and pleading emotion. "You were never trying to be a monster," he said softly, his voice trembling but sincere. "You were trying to protect her. You were trying to keep what you loved safe. You were trying to hold on because you were afraid of losing her again." The mountain responded with a low, deep vibration beneath their feet, not violent but resonant, like a saddened sigh from something unimaginably vast. "But you have hurt her," Adrian continued, tears stinging at his eyes as he looked at Elara's still face. "You have kept her from living. You have trapped her in endless fear. You have taken her from people who loved her each lifetime. You have stolen her future in the name of love. That is not protection. That is not care. That is loneliness clinging so tightly that it becomes pain." He stepped closer, still holding Elara with one hand, as if physically shielding her, even while he spoke to the unseen ancient spirit towering around them. "She deserves to be alive," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "She deserves to laugh without fear. She deserves to see days without feeling watched. She deserves to love without being punished for it. She deserves a life that belongs to her, not to anyone else. Not to me, not to you, not to fate, just to her." For a long moment, there was silence. A silence different from every silence before. It was not the silence of threat. It was not the silence of looming doom. It was silence filled with ache. Adrian's voice softened even further as he spoke the hardest part. "I know what it is to lose someone you love," he whispered. "I know what it feels like when the world takes them away. It breaks you in places that never truly heal. It makes you want to hold on to anything that feels like them, anything that promises they will never be gone again. But loving someone also means letting them live, even if living means letting them go." His knees nearly buckled from the emotional weight of those words, the honesty of his vulnerability laid bare not only to the mountain, but to himself. This was not only about Elara anymore. This was also about the man he once was, broken and scarred by loss, now standing here begging something ancient not to repeat his past mistake. He raised his head, tears slipping quietly down his face. "If you truly love her," he begged, "let her be free, not trapped in stone, not bound by fear. Let her live a full life. Let her choose love. Let her breathe without you pulling at her soul. Let this end here, not because I want to win, not because I want to take her from you, but because loving her means giving her a chance to exist as she was meant to, alive, human, unbound." The mountain did not rage, it did not lash out, it simply listened, and for the first time in centuries perhaps, it truly questioned itself. For a long moment, nothing happened. The mountain held its silence in a way that felt deeper than any quiet they had heard before, as if the spirit inside it was no longer reacting, no longer resisting, but thinking. The wind stopped moving entirely. The trees stood perfectly still. Even the air seemed to pause in suspense, suspended between centuries of possessiveness and the fragile possibility of release. Adrian remained there, holding Elara close, heart trembling but steady with conviction, unsure if he had spoken to an emotionless force or to something capable of change. He had offered everything, including his life if necessary. Now he waited, not knowing if the next moment would bring mercy or the end. Then, slowly, a different feeling began to spread around them. The cold edge in the air softened. The mountain seemed to exhale, not in anger this time, but like something ancient releasing a weight it had carried for far too long. The ground beneath their feet vibrated gently, not in threat, but with a kind of emotional tremor, like grief finally finding release after endless years of stubborn silence. A deep, resonant sound rolled through the mountain, not a roar, not thunder, but something mournful. Something that felt heartbreakingly human despite belonging to something far beyond humanity. It was sorrow. It was acceptance. It was letting go. And with that, the connection holding Elara began to break. Her body trembled softly in Adrian's arms as the invisible pull that had gripped her soul loosened. The trance in her eyes faded slowly, inch by inch, like someone waking from a dream they had been trapped inside for lifetimes. Her chest rose in a sharp, shaky inhale, the first true breath she had taken freely since the mountain began calling. Then her strength collapsed all at once. She fainted into Adrian's embrace. He caught her carefully, lowering with her as his knees hit the ground. For a brief, terrifying second, fear seized him again. But it vanished as soon as he felt her heartbeat pulsing strongly beneath his hand. She was alive. She was present. She was hers again. The mountain grew completely still. The whispers vanished. The wind did not scream. It did not cry. It rested. The oppressive heaviness that had always lingered in the air around that place began to lift, like fog slowly losing its grip and dissolving into light. The night did not feel haunted anymore. It felt quiet in the way normal silence should feel. Open, gentle, unthreatening. Silence returned. Not the dangerous, watching kind. A peaceful kind. A kind that allowed breathing again. Adrian held Elara against him, gently brushing her hair from her face, speaking to her in soft, trembling whispers, even though she could not hear him yet. He remained kneeling long after the danger had passed, partly because he was exhausted, but mostly because part of him could not yet believe that something so ancient had listened, understood, and chosen mercy. Slowly, the sky above began to change. The darkness softened. The first pale shades of morning touched the horizon. Light crept carefully into the world, painting the mountainside with slow, gentle color. Dawn arrived, and with it came warmth. When the villagers who had been standing far below in fearful anticipation saw light breaking, they held each other in disbelief and hope. Many had expected destruction. Many had expected screams or the earth tearing open. Instead, the mountain stood quiet, calm, peaceful in a way none of them had experienced in their lifetimes. As the sun rose higher, they began to climb cautiously, hearts pounding with anxious questions and fragile hope. When they finally reached where Adrian knelt with Elara resting against him, they stopped, staring in stunned silence. No storm waited there, no supernatural presence loomed, only stillness, only the sight of the girl who had always belonged to the mountain, now breathing freely in the arms of the man who refused to surrender her. The elders, who had lived their entire existence under the weight of this curse, looked upon the mountain and knew instantly that something inside it had changed. The air no longer hummed with hidden danger. The earth no longer carried that faint, restless tremor. The spirit that once watched everything with possessive hunger now felt quiet, not dead, not erased, simply at peace. The villagers did not know whether to cry or kneel or thank Adrian or fall to the ground in relief. Many did all of those things at once. Shock lived beside gratitude. Fear slowly transformed into wonder. They had believed the mountain could never change. They had believed the curse was eternal. Yet now they stood in a world where dawn came without dread, where silence was safe, and where a girl once claimed by something ancient was finally free. The mountain remained towering and strong, but for the first time in generations, it felt like only a mountain again. Calm, steady, watching, but no longer possessing. It had loved, it had held too tightly, it had learned, and finally, it had let go. And with that, centuries of fear dissolved into morning light. Elara remained still for a while longer, resting in the safety of Adrian's arms, while dawn slowly opened the world around them. The gentle light continued to rise over the mountainside, warming the once cold air, painting the landscape in soft gold and pale morning blue. The villagers stood nearby in quiet awe, not daring to disturb the fragile peace that now surrounded them, afraid that even a loud breath might break this miracle that had unfolded before their eyes. Then, gradually, Elara's eyelids fluttered. Her fingers moved slightly, as if testing life again, as if confirming that the world she returned to was real and not another one of the mountain's endless callings. She drew in a slow breath, deeper and steadier than before, and the first expression to cross her face was not fear, not confusion, but relief. A calm, profound, almost unfamiliar sense of relief, as though she were truly breathing without chains for the first time in her existence. Adrian leaned closer, his voice soft and filled with careful tenderness, as he whispered her name, and she turned her face toward the sound instinctively. Her eyes opened fully now, clear and aware, holding warmth instead of that distant emptiness that had followed her so much of her life. For a brief moment she simply looked at him, silently absorbing his presence, recognizing safety, recognizing love, recognizing the fact that she was still here. Then the realization arrived. She was free. It did not come as shock. It came like a gentle wave, washing over her heart and letting peace settle there in ways she had never believed possible. She could feel it, the absence of the pull, the silence of the whispers, the quiet of the night no longer echoing inside her chest. The mountain's presence, once constantly hovering at the edge of her thoughts, was simply gone. She let out a breath that sounded almost like a quiet sob of relief, though no tears fell. Instead, she allowed herself to relax completely against Adrian. Her body no longer weighed down by something unseen. For the first time since childhood, her spirit belonged entirely to her. Around them, the villagers slowly began to understand too. They watched her sit upright, watched life settle gently back into her movements, watched the way she looked at the world with no shadow trailing behind her gaze. One by one, expressions softened, fear melted into wonder. Elders who had lived decades under the mountain's shadow bowed their heads quietly, overwhelmed by the simple beauty of seeing freedom where there was once inevitable tragedy. The mountain remained still in the background. It stood tall and strong as it always had, but its presence was different now. It no longer pressed on the air around it. It no longer felt as though it were watching every movement with possessive intent. It was peaceful, like a heart that had finally stopped aching after centuries of loneliness. It simply existed now, part of the land, part of nature, no longer the haunting force that governed so many lives. The village felt safe again, truly safe. There was no lingering tension, no uneasy expectation of something dreadful returning, no sense that danger merely slept. What had once been a prison of fear for generations was now just a home again. People felt their shoulders relax in a way many of them had never experienced. They could imagine nights without dread, mornings without worry, futures without the weight of a curse hanging over every birth. Elara stood slowly with Adrian's help, her steps steady, her breathing calm, her spirit present. The elders approached, not as judges, not as fearful leaders, but as grateful witnesses to something impossible that had finally happened. They spoke softly, thanking her in the quiet, respectful way people speak to someone who has carried too much pain and still remained gentle through it all. They thanked Adrian as well, not loudly, not dramatically, but with sincerity, recognizing the strength of love that had faced something ancient and chosen compassion rather than battle. There was nothing left to fight now. There was only life to live. Eventually, as the morning continued to brighten and the world felt completely awake again, Adrian and Elara turned away from the mountain together. They did not rush. They walked slowly, hand in hand, step by step, as if allowing every moment to settle into reality, allowing their hearts to accept that they were truly free to simply exist beside each other without the weight of fear following behind. The villagers stepped aside gently, not pushing forward, not crowding, simply making space with quiet respect. Some smiled softly, some nodded with emotion they tried to hide. Others watched with peaceful tears in their eyes, because they were witnessing the end of something dark, and the beginning of something calm and deeply human. As Adrian and Elara left the mountainside, the day continued peacefully. Birds began to sing again. The breeze returned in a kind way, touching the land softly. The world felt lighter, warmer, kinder. Everything that once seemed haunted now rested. Their story did not end with explosions of celebration. It ended the way true healing often does, quietly, gently, with relief spreading slowly through every breath. Elara walked forward with the freedom to choose her own life. Adrian walked forward knowing he had kept his promise and found peace where he once carried grief. The mountain rested, no longer a prison, no longer a jealous spirit, but a silent guardian of memories finally allowed to fade.